My site. My name is Paul, and I have a real estate license in the state of Virginia. And I live near Lexington on the western side in the Shenandoah Valley. And I talk a lot about buying and selling real estate and evaluating property on this site. So I hope you come back and watch some of my other content and listen through and see if I have anything relative that you might be interested in. So let's take an example here. I'm in the process of finding some property actually for a client, and there's a requirement that we have to find 10 acres. We want kind of a homestead, at least one home, a certain size, not too big, but have some infrastructure, some outbuildings, maybe some fencing. And the whole plan of this property is to buy a homestead that we can develop. Now, I want to tell you some real life examples of how me as a realtor, and actually this is a family purchase, and how we're going about this and how we can evaluate property, because there's a lot of nuances in real estate. There's a practice in real estate sales where you try to evaluate the so-called comparable price that other properties may have sold recently or on the market right now, and that are similar in various aspects. And in some areas, like a suburb, you might be able to actually get a pretty good idea within a narrow band of what the market price is for that type of house. Because, for example, many houses in some of these developments are very, very similar. They're like cookie cutter houses, and maybe a few different colors or positions of rooms and so on. But basically, easy to evaluate. Now, in rural property, it's a very, very different experience, because you might not even have any real comparable sales even in the last year. For example, on this particular example, we're talking about, I won't give you the number, but we had a value of price, and we had a minimum of 10 acres, and the idea was that we want road access, we want sufficient size house for the occupants that were going to happen there, and we want good soil, we want some good sun exposure, and we definitely need some water, secure water, and so on. So in the state of Virginia, there's many, many, many types of those properties, and many of them are very, very active. A lot of people who drive around Virginia, and you'll be startled to see just how much land is in active production. It's not just wild forest. There's timber operation going on. There's cattle and sheep and all kinds of stuff going on all around Virginia for miles and miles and miles. And sometimes even down long gravel roads, there's activity where people are having little homesteads and so on. So it's a very common thing here, but the problem is people are happy there, and it's hard to find them for sale. So I did a search for our qualifications or everything, and in the whole state of Virginia, I think it was like 29 properties that might fit what we need. And that's not very many in the whole state of Virginia. And not among those, not very many were near us. So you're talking about, like, okay, maybe there's 4 or 5 within an hour, 2 hours, or whatever of this location where we're going to move from and position ourselves. It really restricts your choice. When you have a certain qualifications or a certain kind of a criteria that you need for your home or your property, there's a very, very narrow band if you're in this type of a market here. You can, a lot of suburban homes and even cities that have blocks and nice little homes along the old quaint streets like Waynesboro. There's a lot of those kind of homes that pop up for sale. But a homestead that I want has some infrastructure so that it's not just a house, because you're going to have equipment and tools and all kinds of activities, like maybe a potting shed or maybe some chickens. You need some fencing. You need just like something going on there when you buy it. Otherwise, you'll have to do everything. And building thousands of feet of fence and cutting down a whole bunch of trees is a huge operation. And so you have to look for some land that has some part of cleared, and that cleared part, if you intend to have crops of any kind, you need sun. Lot of sun, as much as possible, so you can grow a full crop. And sometimes even in certain kinds of plants, you might be able to do like 3 crops or radishes or something like that. See, so there's a lot of planning and strategy going in, because let's say you narrow it down to those few properties, this 5 properties, and then how do you decide? Okay, so I'm going to give you some real world examples here of some properties that I looked at. I went to one property that turned out to be really not in very good condition, and it was very wooded. I mean, it had gravelly soil, not much cleared land, and price per square foot was fine. It was a modular home. It wasn't a really great home, but it was functional, and they had like 10 acres or so. But then we walked around and you go, wow, this is all mostly woods, and there's not many good soil here, and the sun doesn't come at the right angle, even for solar. And then, yeah, they got a chicken coop, but, you know, there's no other place to build anything, and there's these ravines going down. So, you see what I'm saying? There's a immediate process. Okay, that's not going to work for us. Okay, it looked good on the research results and so on, but no, that's not the one. So you start learning. Say, well, I got to have that sunshine, and I got to have that soil. Even if it was smaller acreage, if you don't have that sun, you see. So now I went and looked at another one, and this one actually, I went with another customer looking a little bit further north here. But we got there, and I'll tell you, you walk around the house, and it was sweet. Everything was clean, and everything is nice, and the 2 owners were teachers. And you know, I noticed there's no toys, none. And if you have kids, and there's no room for the toys, where's the kids' playroom? How are we going to manage them? Because if everything is immaculate, and the guitar is close to the ground, and there's no space for the kids to play and have their toys, the young couple who looked at it said, well, it's got a great property, it's got a shed over there, it's got a ravine, it's got a nice well, it's got a place for fencing, and a lot of good stuff about it. It had a stand of bamboo, but the house, even though it was really a nice house in great condition, it just would not serve for their toddlers. So that was that out. Now, another one I looked at near my town, where I happen to be living at the moment, in Buchanan, Virginia. Now, I have a familiarity with this area, and I drive around a lot of the side roads and see what's out there going on with real estate. And I know this particular road, there's a house on this particular road that was 20 acres. And I said, man, I got to go take a look at that, because I know that area. There's horses, there's really beautiful homesteads, a whole bunch of them, 20, 10, 15 acres. There are cows and things like that, sheep, different crops, hay, so on going on there. Now, this particular piece of land, we looked at it, man, it's got a natural slope, it had a man-made pond there, it had a spring flowing down there, it was coming in, and the water had a natural irrigation. Everything kind of flowed softly down on a gentle angle toward the pond and then down into the ravine. And there was lots of fertile land and lots of sun. The sun came up on the east, and then the front had a nice porch on the east side, and big barn, and lots of space to store things, and there were ducks in the pond, and you start thinking, man, this could be it here. But then, after retrospect, the house was kind of old, and they had done a lot of remodeling. They had nothing fine remodeling. It was kind of rustic. The people who lived there had horses, and they, believe it or not, it was like 2 bedrooms, and there were 5 people living there. There's 2 adults and the 3 children in one 2-bedroom house. They had a pretty big living room. And anyway, so there were some construction issues that they promised, okay, by closing we're going to repair this thing, and everything's going to be fine. The sink's going to be back in, the toilet's going to be back in, and all that stuff. And it's just, that house is the sweetest property. They had a knoll at the top, and you could climb up there. Part of it was forested, and there was just like beautiful views of the Shenandoah Mountains in the Blue Ridge Mountains every morning when the sun comes up and all that. So it's like very, very tempting. But we found out that another offer had been made, and we were going to do a backup offer on this one, because it was a sort of a iffy thing whether they close on time, because the interest rate was going to go up, and you know, the owners were already moved, and they had some issues with maybe trying to get the whole job done. And so we decided, okay, we're going to go elsewhere. So this is the kind of thing that you get into. You start thinking in detail, what about this property? Maybe it's just so beautiful, like, except for that house. Or maybe it's just like there's a lot of other great things about it. It backs up to state land and there's hunting and all kinds of stuff, but there's no good for soil. You can't grow anything there. That's an issue. So these are the reasons why the choices for buying a homestead type property get narrower and narrower and narrower, and why they're in such demand. And that when you find something, think carefully about what you can deal with. You can expand a house if you got the skills or the money. You can change, or you can remodel a basement. There's a lot of things that you can do with a little bit of funds, and a lot of do-it-yourself stuff you can do. You can build yourself a chicken coop if it doesn't have one. But there's certain fundamental things that you're probably going to need some storage. You're going to probably need some fencing if you have any kind of animals, or even keeping deer out of your garden. You're probably going to need a place to park. You're going to have some machinery and tools you're going to need on that property. So you got to think, okay, what can I bring to the table if it's not there? What can I build or import? Maybe I can buy a shed and have it planted there if there isn't one already. So think about what you can bring to the table, because it's very unlikely that you're going to get all your wishes in one property, but you definitely want to get water. So I want to tell you about this other property that is under consideration, and this is a very interesting situation here, because this particular property has 20 acres and is owned by a person who, over the years, he knew how to operate machinery, even repair machinery. He had his own bulldozer, and he had made a beautiful pond, had fish in it. It was an ecosystem already with cattails. There was a stream fed coming down into the feed that pond, and it was a flow through. It wasn't just a static pond, and it had a natural spring that fed 2 residences on the property. There was a mobile home, and there was another small home from the 1940s. And there was a big shed, but it was kind of crumpled. But this guy was a machinist. He could fix all his own tractors and everything. So he had a really nice machine shop, or not an exact machine shop, but he had a tool shed and workshop, and it had a giant wood stove in it as well. So then the house. Well, we walked in the house. So it's not too bad, great roof and everything, but it's a little small, it's older. And then he says, well, you know, we got a nice wood stove here, but right near where the wood stove is, this particular joist on the flooring probably needs to be repaired. And he said it's a little bit of a sag, but he lives there. He's been living there for a long time. And he said there was another place that we didn't see. And I looked around the house, and well, there are a lot of painting you could do and change some light fixtures, and we could do all that stuff. Had a good roof, good foundation, and a shed full of firewood, free firewood. There was a couple of persimmon trees on it, and a few little smaller apple trees, and they had a whole lot of fencing there, and he had down by the stream there was a little bit of trees left, and he had done all the clearing of the property except where it was appropriate, and he had left a stand of trees down by the pond where you go down and fish and just enjoy the evening, and family type of gathering down in kind of the hollow there. And then up on the hill there where the other property was, the other house, was a beautiful view and an easy access, a second access. So there's a lot of road frontage on this property. I'm telling you all the really great things about this property, but there's one thing I haven't told you yet. And that is that because this fellow had lived there for a long time, and he had all kinds of equipment and machines and storage units and things like that going on, storage containers on his property, including an older mobile home that was decrepit, this property did not show well. Because you show up at the property and go, yeah, but it's going to take 60 days to clear all that. So I went and had a talk with the owner, and I said, well, can you really get this out of here in 60 days? Do you have the means or the equipment? And this guy had logging trucks and a bulldozer and tractor and everything. So yeah, he said, I know, I already got a place to go, and I'm going to take it. It's going to take me a couple of months. So, but the problem is that a lot of people can't see beyond that. So I started considering, like, look, the price he was asking, he was fixed on a price, and he wasn't going to budge on this price. But the problem was that it just did not show well. People show up, so I'm sorry, I can't buy a property that has all this junk on it. And they can't foresee, well, if it is cleared. I saw it in October. I'm going to go see it again soon. The land in the spring would be just absolutely just delightful with, just, he had a big ram there and a goat, and there was a second smaller feeder pond, and a spring They had a spring feeding both hells. They did have an old well that the pump had gone shot, but they had the spring that pumped water all the way up from the spring to two residences. Two residences on one property, and the price, I as a realtor know that if that price, if all that equipment was gone, when people looked at it, it was sold long ago and probably get a bidding war going on it. But because of this situation, you see, this is the kind of things that, in final, to explain to people that when you look at a property, you have to have some vision for it, because it's not going to look like your dreams when you see it first. I lived on a property one time in upstate New York when I was married, and we went in December to start looking at a property, and there wasn't much on the market. There was very certain specifications. It needed to be near a train line and all that, and need to be within a budget. We found this delightful, tiny little house that had 15 apple trees, a little stream on one end, 2.5 acres. It had a large 2-car garage. It had southern exposure. It had beautiful field behind you that nobody was ever going to build on. It was either corn or soybean, and the moon tracked from east to west, and we could sit on the back deck and watch this whole thing. And it was a delightful property. But when we saw it, it was advertised as a 5-bedroom. It used to be like a post and beam tenant house. It was a sharecropper house. There was like a tiny upstairs. We had 1 bedroom, 2 nice baths. We ended up gutting it. We opened up the ceiling, and then we put in some skylights, and we hung plants down, and there was all exposed beams, and it was like, I did the whole basement down there, and that was gravel when we got there. So we had the vision to take this particular property and say, okay, yeah, I have some visions for this. And by the time we got finished, after 5 or 6 years living there under construction, it was such a unique house. We had hanging plants. Everything was like custom. I built a custom area for our stairs down the basement, and an area to store all the CDs and spices. We had a little wood stove in there. We had a hanging, pot hanger above the wood stove. It was a delightful little place, but it was very, very small. And really only 2 people could live there. But you have to have the vision, and before you go out looking, put some notes down and say, like, this is what I must have. It's got to include water, good sun exposure, soil, a few things like that you got to have. And then there's some maybes. Maybe if I had if I have a wraparound deck, covered porch or something like that, that's fine. Or maybe a pool if you like that kind of thing, or some architectural gardening type of things with little stuff and little fountains and things, maybe like that. Maybe you want a chicken coop. Okay, but think of the core, what you really need, and then what you and your ingenuity and your partners and family can build and bring to the table when you buy a property. So cover in retrospect a few of the things. I hope you learned something from my experience of looking. We're still looking actually for property. And when you talk about location, we say, let's say you have a field of 50 candidates, and it'll take you weeks to go visit them all. So I'll tell you, I'm a realtor and I have access and I have codes and things that I can get in. But you make an appointment, you go look at some place, and then you go look at another place, and you might go look at 3 or 4 places in a day, and your realtor is getting tired out. Say, which one you got to kind of narrow it down yourself before you start getting a realtor involved, and be very specific about what you must have. Like, you must have room for your kids, for example, or you must have room in the house. The house has to be decent condition, so you don't have to fix it up or something. Or you must have the sunshine. We must have the right angle for the solar, and you must have irrigation if you're going to grow crops or anything. So all that kind of stuff, put the must down there on your list, and then put the maybes, and then put a few of the don't wants. So I hope I've informed you and maybe entertained you a little bit about buying and selling property, and especially considering real estate in the rural areas. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share. I appreciate it very much. Thanks.